Hello everyone. As we know, van life is something that has been widely popular on social media for quite a long time now. And we often talk about how fun and exciting and adventurous van life can be. And I watch the videos as well. I find them very interesting. I think the idea of being free and being able to travel anywhere with just your van with all your belongings in it sounds really fun. There's videos of people decking out their vans and going to really cool places around the world. However, we don't often talk about the scary side of van life and how dangerous it may be, especially traveling as a solo female. And the woman in today's case was doing van life before it was even popular on the internet. But unfortunately, she would disappear. 31-year-old Sara Coates was living her dream of van life back in 2012. She had an older model blue Chevy Astro minivan, her dog Jasmine, and her 2 to 3 cats who all traveled with her as she went back and forth between Alberta and British Columbia. Sara was described as an adventurous spirit who had made a lot of acquaintances in different areas. She was very spiritual, nice, and her main loves in life were animals, the environment, human rights, and music. Sara also wasn't very big into using her cell phone. She often would leave it off for periods of time and sometimes wouldn't contact people for a while. She seemed to just really love the solidarity of van life and just being within herself with her pets on the road. It's said that she'd taken the van life after tragedies in her life led her to coping through travel. From what I read, she may have had a chronic illness, although I don't know exactly what that illness was, but it seems like she wanted to spend as much time in nature as she could. And her long-term goal seemed to be to save up enough money so that she could buy a larger motorhome so that she could travel all across Canada with her animals. Sara also often went by Mika or Miko and had a homemade tattoo of a heart on her left knuckle. Her mother sang, and I quote, "Sara was just a different kind of person, not a crazy homeless transient, just different. She made the best of her life, which wasn't very good with a disability, but she still made the best of it." End quote. Sara was last seen by her mother in Calgary, Alberta on August 1st of 2012, when the two of them took a walk through Stanley Park. The last conversation they had being about trying to help Sara move back home. Her mother saying, and I quote, "The last words I said were, we have to find you a place. You can't keep living in your van." End quote.
I saw her, I believe it's August 1st at Stanley Park. I was showing her a bench that we wanted to buy in memory of my parents and a couple of my brothers that had passed away. And then I was working, and she said she was just going to want to camp that weekend or stay with friends. So we took a little walk with her dog along by the swimming pool there and everything, which was very nice day. And the last words I said, I gave her a hug when I got on the bus and said, "Don't worry, I'll help you next week. Like, we have to find you a place to live. You can't keep living in your van." Like, she'd been traveling for about a year, but she was ready to come home.
But Sara would eventually get back in her van with her animals and leave again on another trip. From what family knew, Sara was first headed to the Radium area, then the Columbia Valley area. However, when she didn't show up there and she didn't call her family or friends for over 2 months, her mother began to worry. Sara had always kept up with all of her registrations and her payments for living in her van. That was until December, and her mother realized that Sara hadn't paid the registration on her van, which was due in October, which is something she definitely wouldn't have done because she lived in her van. If it wasn't registered, she got pulled over, she could get in big trouble. Her actual home that she lived in could be taken away. There was a lot of implications, and she was very responsible about that, it seemed. So when that wasn't done, that was a huge red flag. Her mother sang, and I quote, "When she didn't call for the pink card or I couldn't reach her, I was worried. But she's an adult and very independent, and never in my whole life would I have thought something would have happened to Sara." End quote. As time continued to pass with no contact, Sara's mother's bad feeling got worse. And when she checked her daughter's bank accounts and realized there was no activity in them for quite a long time, that is when she finally called police. Her mother saying, and I quote, "The bank isn't supposed to tell you the account balance, but I was crying so much and so hysterical that the teller told me there was no bank activity since August." End quote. Which is very thankful that that bank teller ended up breaking the rules and telling her mother that information, because that really just solidified right there for sure that something was wrong. Because as we know, some of the biggest red flags are, people not contacting anyone anymore. Most people always have their phone on them, or always contacting at least someone, or being active somewhere on some kind of social media or just something nowadays. Another one is using their bank account. Of course, people can have cash, but usually there is still some kind of transactions of some sort coming from your bank account. Maybe they're tapping a card here, maybe they're pulling out cash somewhere, some kind of activity. But when there is absolutely nothing, it just stops cold, that is a big red flag. and Sara was meeting all of the red flags. Sara wouldn't be reported missing until December of 2012, but the media wouldn't start reporting about her disappearance until May of 2013, nearly 9 months after Sara was last seen alive. And let me tell you, researching this case was hard because there wasn't that much reporting done on Sara's disappearance. I almost didn't get enough information to make this a dedicated video to her case, but I really thought it was important to, so I dug and dug and dug. I've been paid for a subscription to newspapers.com, which isn't cheap, surprisingly, and I ended up finding a couple newspaper articles on there reporting her disappearance, but honestly, the media didn't do that much to talk about Sara, even after it took nearly a year for them to start talking about it. Her mother saying, and I quote, "The day I reported her, I knew she was dead. Sara would never let anything happen to those animals, and I knew if she wasn't using her bank account, then she wasn't feeding those animals. So something happened to my daughter." End quote. And that's a great point that her mother brought up, because Sara wasn't just on her own. She had a dog and multiple cats with her. And as I talked about earlier, Sara adored animals. It was one of her passions in life. Clearly, if she's bringing that many animals on the road with her in a very small van. And the last thing anyone would do is not feed their animals and let their animals starve. So the fact that, yes, Sara wasn't using her bank account at all is a big red flag, but then on top of that, you know that she has animals with her, she has other things depending on her, and she's not gonna be taking care of those things then, that's another red flag. And that's extremely worrisome. Now, honestly, there is not that much in Sara's disappearance information-wise. I did find that police were eventually able to somehow access Sara's phone records, although her phone has never been found, and police seem to have come across a woman who Sara had been in contact with back in August. Now, this woman would eventually go onto Reddit, which I know, don't forget on me, probably not the best source for information. However, I thought this would be important to talk about because this woman goes by Darcy Mulder on Reddit. And when she first ran into Sara, back before Sara disappeared, she actually took to Reddit to ask for people's help, writing, and I quote, "I found a homeless girl living in her van with a dog and 2 cats. Need advice. Her van was parked at the dog park I go to in the morning, so I took her and the dogs to my place to grab a shower and let the dog out to run. I might be able to find a place for her dog and cats while she looks for an apartment that takes the animals, but I don't know what else I could do for her. She's got money for rent and food, and the animals aren't starving, just cramped in the van. I helped her look for apartments today, but her biggest problem is finding a place that will take the animals. That's why I helped her out." End quote. So to me, I do find that statement quite believable because it was posted before Sara went missing. It meets all of the points of Sara, someone with a dog, 2 to 3 cats, has a disability income coming in, she's in a van and she's traveling, seemingly homeless because she's living in her van. It does sound exactly like Sara. And as we know, the last conversation Sara had with her mother was about finding a permanent home. So it seems like, once she got on the road, she really got thinking. Maybe she thought it's probably a better decision if I do eventually get an apartment, somewhere to be. But then she had all these requirements because of her animals. So all of that seemed to be lining up. Now, after Sara's disappearance, Darcy would once again take to Reddit to confirm that it was in fact Sara that she had run into, speaking more in depth by saying, and I quote, "Yes, this was the girl that I found last summer. I haven't heard from her since the end of August last year. I got a call from the missing persons department a few weeks ago, inquiring about how I knew her, if I knew her, where she was headed, etc. I guess they got my number from her contacts list, which the phone company will give the police in cases like this. When the officer told me he got my number from her phone, my first thought was, oh shit, where did you find her phone but not her? I'm a bit worried about her, but she seemed content living the traveling style, so I wouldn't be surprised if she just picked up and went somewhere warmer. When I met her, she was extremely upset, but it was about losing one of her cats, not about her situation as far as I could tell. She had parked her van near a junkyard while looking for a part for her van, and the cats were let out to roam for a few hours. When one of them didn't come back before the yard closed, she ended up staying near the yard all night in that evening. She then left and returned several times that day. Her main concern was the cat would try to follow her scent somehow and not have a permanent spot where she parked her van at night. She feared the cat would be lost. Whenever I had her over from my place for dinner and a shower, she'd use my computer to look for her cat online, checking the animal service pages, Humane Society, etc. I think a few times she looked for an apartment." End quote. So I think Darcy's statement there also says quite a lot. It speaks about how Sara would go to areas like junkyards, which aren't usually in great areas, Not saying that all aren't, but sometimes they're also in quite more secluded areas. And I want to assume it probably was if she was letting her animals out to just roam around. I don't think if this junkyard was on a busy street, she would have let her animals out to run around and possibly get hit by a car or something. And then the fact that she lost her cat, she kept going back to that spot over and over again trying to find her cat, again speaks on how dedicated she was to taking care of her animals. But at this point, Sara hadn't been found, her van hadn't been found, her animals were nowhere to be found. It was as if she had just disappeared off the face of the earth.
Did you have a hard time convincing people?
Oh my God,
that she hadn't just driven off?
Yes. Even my family thought she's just off on the hippie trail or something like that, or I don't know what the police were thinking. Of course, you have to look at it from their point of view, as my son always points out, and he's correct. They see a girl traveling in the van with cats whose mother's name is Doobie. There first I think, oh my God, whatever's going on. But I think a big problem at the time was protocol and training within the police department, and that has been improved quite a bit.
It wouldn't be until a year later, on October 22nd of 2013, that Sara's blue van would be located in a very rural, secluded area of Morley, Alberta, which is part of the Stoney Nakoda First Nation people's land. And it would be found after an anonymous tip was sent in, and it was found on a logging road that had no cell phone reception. And as you can see from the map here, if this is where her van was found, that means she didn't make it that far from her starting point in Calgary. However, it is on the way to the Radium area, which she was meant to stop first in, but that must mean she never even made it to her first destination. It also makes me wonder, what exact town or area did she run into that woman who was posting on Reddit about trying to help her, and where that area was that she lost her cat? Because that is information I haven't seen anywhere, but it would be interesting to see for the timeline purposes and where that stop was in correlation to where her van was later found. Now, when police found Sara's van and they began to examine it, it looked as if it had been there for a long time. Sara's purse, along with her most recent disability check, were also found inside the van, along with some scattered clothing. Again, things like people's purses being found, her money being left behind, those are all bad signs, all red flags. Some of her belongings were also found scattered amongst the forested areas around her van. However, there were no signs of Sara whatsoever. Her animals were also never found, and no animal rescue groups in the area had ever reported to have found her animals or, had them brought into them. Numerous searches would also be conducted. However, nothing ever came of them. And as I said, there's pretty much no information in this case. Yet Sara's family is still looking for her to this day. Back in 2020, her mother, her brother, and his wife all took part in another search as well. They've trudged through swamps, forests, uphill, downhill, all looking for Sara. One police officer saying, and I quote, "Over the years, we have spoken to multiple witnesses. We do believe that Sara had dealings with some residents in the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and there was some communication. As of yet, we have not had any definitive idea of what happened to her. Every year, there is always theories of what may have happened, and we are dedicated to following up on those theories or ideas that people might have." End quote. So really what that says to me is that police have absolutely nothing. And honestly, when it comes to Sara's disappearance, it's as mysterious to me as Leah Roberts, which I've also done a deep dive on her case. Sara set out to travel across the province and then seemingly vanished without a trace. And the fact that it took months to report her missing, which I will say isn't truly her family's fault. Sara was living a transient lifestyle. She didn't seem to keep in contact with her family like every week even. So unlike people where, sometimes people talk to their family every day, every week, or whatever, and you have kind of a guideline of when they're going to contact you. And when that stops, you kind of immediately know something's wrong. It took a while for her family to realize that something may be wrong. And it took things like looking at her bank account and realizing that she hadn't, done her registration for her van to realize that those were big red flags and that something may have happened to her. But not only that, the fact as well that it took over a year to find her van as well. That means that whatever happened to her, there was a huge lead if there was foul play here, which in my opinion, I feel like there is. If there is someone out there that did something to Sara, they had months and months and months and a year to either dispose of her body somewhere far away and then dump the van in that location, or to even run on their own if they're not in the area anymore. And as I said, I'm all for having fun and doing solo travel. I think it's a really cool thing to be able to do. I even contemplated it, but I don't have a driver's license to even do it. But just the idea of being able to travel and see different places and, camp over places, I think it's really cool. And I have nothing for that. But I think it's also important to talk about the dangers of it. And I've seen solo travelers speak online about the dangers of it, where they park places and people are knocking on their van because all that's between you and the outside world is a car door. And you can be followed, especially if you want to stay in one spot for a while or camp in like a remote campground or go travel to remote places, because most van life people aren't driving throughout cities. They're going to, sit on mountaintops and, hidden lakes. They're going to really cool places, and that can be dangerous. Sara just wanted to go sightseeing. She wanted to live her life freely despite her disability. It was something she had been doing for quite a while, it seems, and she seemed to be very experienced in it. Yet it seems like something may have happened to her not long after she left Calgary. It makes me wonder if she was pulled over on the side of the road to sleep and someone ambushed her. That theory has been brought up in the Leah Roberts case. If she was parked somewhere, someone maybe even posing as a police officer or just trying to say they needed a jump for their car or something, maybe knocked on her window in the night and got her to come out and then kidnapped her or did something to her. It makes me wonder if someone lured her off somewhere and then dumped her van where it was found. And I also really wonder what happened to her animals. Since we have little to no information on how the van was exactly found, was there windows open? Was there a door opened? Were there windows broken? Because if something like that did happen, the animals could have just ran off into the woods. So I truly wonder what police did exactly find. Were there signs of foul play? With these Canadian cases, they don't really let much information out, which I think could really hinder a case like this, especially since it's been like 12 years now, and we have little to no information. I think this case could have blown up just as big as Leah Roberts' case if there was more information, like in Leah Roberts' case. In my opinion, I don't think Sara just ran off to start a new life. There would have been some kind of indication of that, like her taking all the money from her bank account or something. Why would she leave her disability check behind if she needed the money to go start a new life, And I truly do not believe she would ever leave her animals behind. Especially we've seen proof of that if the Redditor is true, of her going to that shop, waiting for her cat for days and days and days when she accidentally lost it. In my opinion, I think just even from the limited information we do have, something most likely bad happened to Sara. But I think it's just a matter of time until someone slips up and says something or comes forward with some kind of information that can break this case. Take a good look at Sara once again. She is described as a white female with long red hair and blue eyes, standing 5'2" and 110 pounds. She has 2 surgical scars on her inner groin and a tattoo of a heart on her knuckle. She would be around 43 years old if she is still alive out there right now. And I think that's another good point to bring up too, before we end this, is that Sara was only 5'2". She was my height. I'm short, let me tell you. So the fact that she was out there solo traveling like that, someone could have easily overpowered her, in my opinion, because she was such a small or petite person. So it's just scary. It truly is scary. As fun as van life may seem, you really have to think of everything. And stuff like this can happen. And we've seen it happen before. We've seen it with Gabby Petito as well. And it's scary and it's sad that someone who just wanted to have that kind of freedom had it taken away from her. And we don't even know how or why or what they did to her. Sara is somewhere out there and her family deserves answers. So if you have any information on Sara's disappearance, please contact the appropriate authorities. I'll have them down below. And I would love to discuss with you all how you feel about this case. Have you ever heard about it? As always, I hope you'll stay safe out there. Lock your windows and doors. And if you're going to do van life, please do it safely, because I hope to see you in the next video.